welcome to the Mindset Michele TV show. And we're so excited to have you joining us again for another fabulous episode of the Mindset Michele TV show. Today's extra special guest is the fabulous and the wonderful Danielle Dobson. Hello, Danielle.
Hi, Michele. Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
It's so exciting to have you here and to have you talking about some of those areas that people may or may not be aware of. And it's so fascinating when you start to think about how we may be like a computer, in some ways pre-programmed. Now, Danielle, for those of you that may not have heard of this fabulous woman, is the founder and CEO of the Code Connections, and she's the author of Breaking the Gender Code. So she has lots of coding background, but not in the IT way that some people may be thinking, but in that coding of how we come to be who we are for our expectations, beliefs, and experiences. But enough of me telling you about Danielle. Danielle, please share who you are and how you came to be doing such interesting things with the people viewing.
Oh, thanks, Michele. Thanks for that lovely introduction. Who am I? Wow, that's a big question, and it's quite philosophical, really. Who am I? I've been trying to work that out my whole life, so I'm still not 100% sure. I'm still working it out. But essentially, if we talk about roles, I mean, that's sort of a good way to help people understand a bit more. So I'm an author, as you mentioned, of Breaking the Gender Code, and I'm a mother of, actually I call myself a lead parent and family CEO of 3 boys, two of them teenagers and one a teenager. And also I'm a coach, an advisor, a speaker, a facilitator, but also I'm a community contributor. I'm a friend, a partner, all those sort of things. And I guess I bring all of that together in terms of, what I do in terms of leading and supporting at the same time. So that's how I kind of describe myself, and someone who is a risk taker, a code breaker, someone who doesn't really just accept things without, a sense of that I've understood that there's meaning and purpose behind things. So that's a blessing and a curse, I guess. So I guess that's how I'd sum myself up. And in terms of my work, that was the other question, was it?
Well, I think people may be more interested because understandably, you meet somebody, you get married, you have kids, but how did you come to be working in that area of calling yourself like a code breaker and working in this code area? It's not like a university degree or something that you can go and specifically study. Coaching, etc., I think people understand as well. But I'm sure they're interested. How did you come to specialise? What was it about your background or your experiences that led you to be working in this space?
That's such a good question. And would you believe that I was actually a CPA? So I was actually working in the corporate world. That was where I was professionally raised. So, all those years, probably like 15 years or so ago, I was a CPA to where I am now. Like if someone had said that way back then, that I would have thought, what do you mean? What are you talking about? That's nuts, because also a lot of the businesses that I worked for were engineering services, and mining. So I worked on a steel mill, a steel site in Italy, in the middle of Italy for a bit. I worked in the UK, in America, in Pittsburgh, which are also big for steel, and I had a stint in China for a bit, down in Melbourne. That's where I started. So, and it was interesting, when I was in that space, I didn't really sense any discrimination or barriers based on my gender. And I think that had a lot to do with the way that I was brought up, because I think I'm a code breaker from way back. When I was in primary school, in the Catholic faith, there's something called your first Holy Communion. Typically, girls wear lovely white dresses. This is back in the 80s, and sometimes veils and with lace and all that sort of thing. And to me, it just didn't make sense. It wasn't what I normally wore, because I was always outside kicking the footy with my brothers, AFL football, or playing cricket or riding bikes, but it just doesn't make sense. So if you look at the photo of everyone gathered of our year level, I was the one with the short hair, a blue dress with white polka dot, and blue suede shoes.
I knew I liked you for some reason. You're reminding me of my own. I went to a Catholic high school and we had a debutante ball, which is similar to like a coming out or a year 12 party sort of thing. And exactly the same. Everybody was in these big white flowing ball gowns, and I wanted a blue dress because it matched the colour of my eyes.
Yes, of course. Well, that makes sense, Michelle.
And it's all this white, and there I am in blue because it matched the colour of my eyes. I love that, and I can just imagine you with the short hair and
Yep, just standing there, just okay. It's just like, yep, this is where I'm meant to be, and this is the lay of the land. You know, I didn't feel different or strange. And then, other things as well, like at my school as well, primary school, girls had to wear dresses. And I said to my mum, this doesn't make sense, because how am I supposed to kick the football at lunchtime or run around or do things with my friends with this dress on? Plus, it's cold in winter. So we worked together with her support to get pants bought in. And once again, it's in the 80s, so it was quite ahead of our time for girls because it just didn't make sense. So there's that. And also I played AFL football in my brother's team, poor thing, because I've got two younger brothers, and we're quite close in age, 16 months. And you know what? I wasn't really committed to playing AFL, all the time as a sport, because I love netball and tennis and other things. But I wanted to prove that I could do it. So I got my dad was the secretary of the club, so I got him on board. I spoke to the coach, and I played AFL. And I actually played ruck, because girls at that age, that's the person who's in the centre who jumps up really, usually the tallest in the team. And because girls mature more quickly, I was the tallest in the team, so I got that coveted position. And I remember my first ever match. It was against Belgrave. They're black and white, Collingwood colours. And he said, we're up against each other facing off, and he says to his teammate, this will be easy. This girl, I can beat her. And I'm like, I'll show you. And, of course, I got the ball. But I just played for 5 games to get my participation trophy to prove that I could do it. It was, and no girls played. There was no girls in the whole competition, in the team. There was a girl who was 2 years older than me, Tracy. She was a trailblazer. So she laid the path. But it was something I just thought, I'm going to do this, and I did it. So that was my sort of operating system. So being in a, on mine sites or with a whole lot of men and engineers, it didn't seem like a big
it wasn't that
leap.
Big a shift for you.
No, I knew how to play the game, and I knew, having, been around a lot of men and boys, that you've got to play the whole, your life as a game. There's strategy. It's like a sport, of one-upmanship and all that sort of thing. Not that I necessarily engaged in that, but so it didn't feel like I was discriminated against on the basis of my gender. And the last company that I worked for was a Silicon Valley-based company in the US. And one week I was in corporate America. The next week I was a mum. So, this is another transition point, because you work right up till you drop over there. So there was no transition. And there was this huge, big awakening for me when Alex came, my first son. And it sort of hit me, and I reflected back, and I thought, all of this work that I've been doing, it's not hitting my meaning and purpose, ticking my meaning and purpose boxes. Looking after this child here just seems like the thing that I have to do. And it was in the privileged financial position to do so. So that's what I did. And I'll tell you, Michelle, I have never felt so on fire, so on purpose, and so in the right place than when I was doing that with Alex at his mum at home. So that was a big shift. But then, I wanted to get back into the world and help, other women with, the struggles that we all deal with when children are young. So always been in fitness and health. I thought, why don't I become a personal trainer? So I trained as a personal trainer. I've done Cert 3 and 4 in personal training, set up my little business, DNA Energize, outdoor fitness, and I specialise with women with pelvic floor weaknesses, so and women who've just had babies. And I love being part of that transformation. I just loved it. But I didn't want to be
How did that then lead into the what you're doing now with the code work and changing people's experiences and beliefs and backgrounds?
Well, I saw that I guess I was just I wanted to make sense and find out why is it that women struggle to prioritise their self-care and health and fitness. And so that's when I became a wellness coach. I looked at the psychology, and then a well-being executive coach. It just sort of progressed, and I could see increasingly with my clients that they were feeling burnt out, exhausted, anxious, and then also not being able to prioritise their well-being. I'm like, what's behind this? What is it? And I was struggling with this tension too, and feeling that you're not doing well enough at work, not doing well enough at home, feeling like you're failing at both. So it's all these crazy things that were going on. I'm like, that code breaking, that making sense of everything. It's like, what is going on here? I've got to find out. So that's when I started interviewing women who are leading at work and leading at home as lead parents and men in senior roles, CEOs, CFOs, entrepreneurs, politicians, journalists.
And that's coaches. How you came to be doing what you're doing now, which is absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure, we could talk for quite a lot longer about that, but I'm keen out of all of that to really understand with, the AFL, or I had images of Flashdance when you talked about Pittsburgh, the industrial scene, all the way through to mine sites and CPA and Silicon Valley. And then, of course, the fabulous having children and finding another really deep purpose of life. But out of all that, if you were to say and share with people what it is that success means to you, with that very deep and passionate background that you so beautifully shared with us, what do you think then success means?
And this is such a brilliant question, because this is exactly what I work on with my clients, and I have done for some time. So success looks and feels differently for all of us, right?
So for yourself, so not so much about what you're doing with your clients, but for you, when you get up in the morning or when you look back on your life, what does success mean for you?
Well, it's a sense of fulfillment. So, and I think it was Aristotle, it was before Aristotle, but this sense of this eudaimonia, I think that's how you pronounce it. So this sense of living a virtuous life. So living in accordance with your values and what's most important to you. So for me, it actually doesn't look like a plan as such, like a visual ticking boxes around, like the wheel of life or anything like that. It's that everything that I'm doing in my day is meaningful and purposeful and important to me, because I use that as an internal compass to make decisions, about how I use my energy and time, and it's sort of like a guiding compass. So when I'm on purpose with that, when I'm doing, listening to that internal compass, I feel fulfilled, and that feels like success.
Fabulous. And that's such a beautiful way of explaining it and encapsulating it. I really love the idea of that internal compass, where when you're on point and on purpose and helping you to guide your energy and your attention and your focus and your money and everything throughout the day, that is a beautiful way of actually describing it. And I think then, given the time, and people really would love to know, with such a incredible background, and you touched on some of the key themes around, the tensions as a mother, as a business owner, as a this, as a that, but also the tensions of, being in a male environment but not feeling like you're any different. And so sometimes people may be expecting you to say that, there was problems or there was this or that, but for you there wasn't any. So kind of the opposite of what other people may, again, have as a bias or something that they think of because of your experiences in those areas. But I'm keen, given that all of that then created the code or the algorithm of who you are, your background and your blueprint, if you like, with those experiences and expectations and beliefs then of going forward, what key tools or tips have you used to then create this successful mindset? I love that internal compass is a great example, but what other tools do you use to keep building on that successful mindset?
Great question. And I just need to clarify one thing around that, because I know the whole story is huge, but everything turned for me when I listened to other people, so their suffering. So listening to the stories of discrimination, power imbalances, poor treatment, unequal distribution of labour professionally and personally. So that triggered in me to from a research project to a mission. And that's why I do the work I do. So I understand I've had a different experience, but other people don't. And the lens that I want to see the world through is very different to the way the world is. So I'm trying to make that better for other people. And in terms of the tools, so I think it's interesting. It's been building over a lifetime, and I've been thinking about it recently a lot. And I think because I've been so self-reliant my whole life and independent, I rely on me. I'm the buck stops with me. So I've got to invest in myself, and I think one of the biggest things is that we can all do, and what's worked for me is self-compassion. So I feel like I have a lot of self-compassion. So I don't have an inner critic. It's usually external critics. There's two people in particular who I will not name, and it's stuff that they've said that goes off in my head. But I have an inner coach. So I think it's like if I tear myself down, who else is there that's going to help me? So it's that, self-compassion, building that, self-compassion muscle. I think that allows you to be truly and authentically compassionate with others. So I think it's that self-compassion. Another one is...
Just before you go on, I think that self-compassion, I really agree with that as a very important tool. And whether it's external things like a pandemic or this or that or a flood or fire, especially being based in Australia, we have lots of natural kind of elements that we're dealing with, and having that compassion for that sense of overwhelm that I'm sure many of your clients are feeling at the moment as well, whether it's a war overseas or a this or that sense of overwhelm with, is there going to be a normal? What can I control? What can't I control? And many of those elements around that self-compassion are many times things are just out of your control. And so it's just letting go. And I love that serenity prayer of, changing the things you can, and letting go of the things you can't. And then the compassion to know the difference, because that very much, especially when there's so much external like you're describing, you can't necessarily do anything about that. And those inner voices, aren't they amazing? Love the way you talk about the inner coaches, dealing with the inner critics.
Yes.
So that's
Absolutely.
a really good tool and a really good way of explaining how people can create that, especially that inner dialogue and that inner mindset around it. And what other fabulous tools would you suggest?
Well, leading on from what you've just said, actually, Michelle, I think one of the biggest things is acceptance. So you've actually said that there about what you can control and what you can't control. And I think it's the big things, and then it's the little things. It's like the little things, accepting what, our current context, who we are, and just, those little environmental niggles that we don't really like, accepting those, and that builds our acceptance muscles for these big things. And I guess I sort of think about that in the sense that, when I speak to people and they say, no, we don't just accept it. Acceptance doesn't mean approval, right? But what acceptance means is that you can focus your energy and attention on dealing with what is, rather than fighting it. So anytime we're kind of fighting something mentally, emotionally, physically, we're using up energy. And it's energy that we could be redirecting to dealing with what we have, so our current context, and looking at the resources we do have that we can use. So I think that acceptance is a key.
I completely agree, and I love the way you linked it into energy then, because what I talk about quite a lot is about getting into the flow, and many people spend a lot of energy fighting against things that aren't just necessarily going their way, and it is difficult sometimes when so much of society celebrates people kind of going against the flow and winning and achieving and this and that. But I think it's recognizing those battles, when to accept and when not to accept, like I was saying, but also then being very aware of the amount of energy that you're placing into those different battles, and whether that energy that serves you, like you were saying with that internal compass, whether that energy serves you staying on true to your purpose, whether that's raising children, running a business, working in an office or for a large organisation. And also, you reminded me when you were speaking then about going with the flow. You described it so beautifully about the process you went through before this interview today of dropping off your son and having that conversation around, well, I have these other commitments and it's pouring with rain. So, there was all of these kind of external environmental factors in amongst the fact that your son needed to get to school and on all of that. And going with that flow and negotiating along the way, I think that's where that acceptance and the energy management is really important, to recognise that life very much is this ongoing negotiation to keep you in the flow and help you to deal with what comes up. Because I've been reading a lot about stress recently, and especially mental health around stress and anxiety. And one of the fascinating things is it talks about a normal level of stress and these everyday issues. And I think that as we're talking about acceptance and the inner compass and many of the other beautiful things that we're sharing, it's also very important to recognise that sometimes your compass is working and sometimes it's not working. And that comes back to that beautiful compassion that you were talking about. And it's more for when it's not working to not beat yourself up, but to get back into the flow again.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And I think with the code, how do you actually work with clients then to see? Because I know that one of the key things about building a successful mindset is developing that awareness around what you are and you're not doing, whether you're being kind or compassionate to yourself, whether you're on purpose or doing somebody else's purpose, which can happen a lot for people working in organisations. Your days are kind of full of what the organisation wants or what the family wants or what friends and outside colleagues want. And it can be hard then to come back to, well, what do I want to achieve and where should I put my energy? So how do you help people then to kind of reprogram, and what tips would you have around reprogramming that?
Great question. And I guess if we start at the starting point, this is kind of where I start, is that we are nature, nurture, and neuroplasticity. So, and that's something that Dr. Sarah Mackay shared with me when I interviewed her. She's a neuroscientist. So if we sort of think of those three elements, so we are who, we're nature. We are who we are. And part of this whole thing is understanding who we are and building that self-knowledge data bank. So understand who we are. It's a lifelong process. We keep learning. And nurture, so our environment and, the environment we're in, the messages that we've received, how often we've received the messages, who they're by and, how they delivered them, what we choose to believe, and then what we choose to then create, and make our own code. So, and everyone's vastly different in that sense. And then there's neuroplasticity, which means that we can change things. And this was highlighted through a conversation with my then 12-year-old son when I was doing all of this research. And I said, we were just talking, I said, what do you love about coding club? An after-school club. And he's the middle child. And he said to me, well, Mum, I'm the worker person in the family. My big brother bosses me around. But when you're in coding, it doesn't boss you around. So you can get to do whatever you want with it. So I'm in charge and I can make anything I want when I make my own code. And I thought, oh, my God, that's so true. And then he went on to say that, you've got to know how coding works. So that's understanding yourself, and that, because before he couldn't read it and understand it. If he saw something, he just, didn't know what it meant. But once he learned it and he understood it, then he knew what it meant. And then he said that, he can make a choice to do what it says or not. And then he can delete parts of the code that don't make sense to him. And then he said that not all code's been created yet, so that we can try new things that haven't been tried and create them. And that conversation, that was before I wrote my book. That I had all this research in the transcripts. I had all of this, research that I'd done, because I said to him, you know what, it's like this coding. It's like a gender code that we've all been, following along for millennia. And that's when he said, is you coding anything like coding that I do in Code It Yourself Club? And that's when he revealed all that to me. And I thought, actually, yes, that's correct. So what we understand that there is a code, so we expose it, whatever your code is. And then you decode it so you understand it more. And then you can decide which parts of your code and your personal algorithm you've been building that you want to keep, because you want to honour it and you value it. And then what parts you want to delete because it's not serving you anymore. And then what new parts you want to create. And then I have a process for that, which is actually in my book called Circle. But you can go through that process where you write and execute your own unique code, one that works for you and not anyone else. So that's...
I love that. And different people talk about that rewriting the code in different ways, whether it's seeing a coach for cognitive behavioural therapy, whether it's affirmations or journaling. There's so many, and it's so wonderful. You described it so well. There's so many different ways that you can empower yourself and rewrite that code and change that code. And I think people like ourselves, there's never been a better time and a more important time for us to keep reminding people as things are happening in the world at the moment that they can rewire that code, redo the code. And I think I loved when you shared about how your son said there's code that hasn't been written yet. How insightful that, it's not all done or finished or completed. He still has the opportunity to be creative and to look further afield than what his big brother wants and what anybody outside of him wants, because big brother would be his main reference point. But anybody outside of him, the teachers, whoever, it's so fabulous to hear that he recognises that he has the power and he has the control of that element, and I'm sure it comes through in other areas of his life as well. I would love to keep talking about how we could rewire and redo this, but how can people then get hold of you? You've mentioned your book and the process, but what's the best way for people after today to contact you?
I think the absolute best way, Michelle, is LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So it's Danielle Dobson on LinkedIn. And then also there's my website, codeconversations.com.au, and that has everything on there, all the work I do, plus a link to the book and speaking and all of those sort of things. So, yeah.
Fabulous. And I'll just point out for those listening, Danielle's got 2 L's in it when you're looking at the lovely Danielle on LinkedIn. And I love asking people this question. If you were to go back to your younger self, the fabulous Danielle, either playing AFL or working as a CPA, mine or in Silicon Valley, what might be some of the key advice that you would give to a younger self?
Great question. I think it would be choose wisely who you have in your circle. So I think in particular when I was a teenager, didn't choose so well, and I didn't know that you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I've shared that with my kids. But I think it's choose who you have close to you. So, are they your mates? Do they have your back or do they hold you back? I think that's a big one. That's what I would tell myself.
I love that, and that makes so much sense. Do they have your back or do they hold your back? And what a wonderful way to end this session today. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Danielle.
You're welcome. It's so great. It went so quickly.
It does. It's amazing how quickly half an hour goes. But I'm sure for the people viewing that we've shared many other insights and tips. And so thank you for sharing your expertise and for assisting people in their own ways to keep being empowered to build their mindset for success. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And to those viewing, it's been another action-packed and full-on half an hour. So thank you for coming to the show today. And from my heart to your heart, be great, be fabulous, and be you.